tēnā hui te kaunihira Whangarei Takua, te rua te kaumā ono o Whangarei. Ka tono ahau ki kai kaunihira te ona, whakatuwhera hea te tātou hui e te karaki.
Tā hea te ara e kakoto ne, te clear the cat box. Tuia te runga, tuia te haro, United Up, United Up. Tuia te ngākau tangata, United Combined Hospital. Te rongo mau, so community security, mau te kut, the stand line force, mau te oho, the alert life force, mau te ko, the balance life force. DA.
Welcome everybody to our meeting for Tuesday, 26th of July. Councillors, we have apologies from Councillors Deeming and Innes. Somebody move with those apologies as it's done. Councillor Martin has moved in, Councillor Conley seconded. Those in favour, aye. Against? Carried. Just some housekeeping matters. You will have all been provided the submissions in both electronic and there are some printed copies, and there is also a supplementary agenda providing us submissions from CPL, so hopefully we've got that as well. Just before we start, I will ask that somebody move recommendations on page 1 of our agenda. They are that Council 1 notes the report, 2, receive and hear the submissions relating to possible actions for a potential future site airport for Whangarei District, and 3, agree that any submissions identified as being received after the close of the submission period and prior to this meeting be accepted for consideration by Council. Councillor Whangarei has his hand up and Councillor Reid is seconding. I'll put that motion. Those in favour, aye. Against? Carried. So back to the housekeeping. Thank you. Submissions will be taken in the order that they've arrived. So you'll be able to see that I'm working on the whiteboard at the back there. Submitters have up to a maximum of 5 minutes to speak to their submission. However, there are some submitters who have been advised that because they're speaking to an organisation submission, they will be allowed additional time. But just a reminder that for most people the maximum time will be 5 minutes. Just for submitters, it's not necessary for you to actually read your submission because we will have read it, but this is your opportunity to speak to it. So just encouraging you to speak to it. You may have handouts or PowerPoints as well. After the submitters have spoken to their submission, I will invite councillors to ask any questions or clarification. It's not time for debate. And also just a reminder that there are no decisions made in this forum. It is specifically to hear from our submitters who wished to be heard. We will be having a council briefing on the 9th of August. There will be our issues and options meeting. Again, no decisions are made at that meeting. It is a briefing, and but it is open to the public. That starts at 10:30 on the 9th of August. The council meeting on the 24th of August is the day that we will be making a decision on the selection of a proposed location. And I guess it's timely for me to say that it's not a decision on the move to a new airport location. It is about the potential for a proposed airport location for Whangarei in the future. I think I've covered all my housekeeping. I get the nod. So I'd like to welcome Julianne Chetta, and Julianne's submission is in volume 8, page 62. A very warm welcome to you, Julianne, and supported by the fabulous Deb Harvey and I, of course.
also busy in terms of doing
Yes, so as mentioned, this is submission on behalf of the Untitled Trust Board and focusing on the Whangarei website. We refer to other Manapua in relation to the other sites in terms of their corridor of those. And I'll just touch on some key points I want to emphasise. The first one being that our organisation now helping us in input whatsoever into the site, the site selection process, which we do not consider to be consistent with what we expect from the partnership with the council, and also as happy that he's a manufacturer agreement with this council and our environmental management plan lodged. The environmental management plan contains a map of our sites of significance, which this council actually mapped for us a decade ago in preparation for the sites of significance plan change, which is the progressed by this council. So whether those sites of significance are mapped in the district plan or not, this council has had access to those sites of significance for a number of years. Because my understanding is that sites of significance were used in a desktop exercise to look at the site selection process or to guide the site selection process. So what we're saying is that if you're insufficient, because there's the issue of that size of significance, not for want of trying as a part of the formula. That's all good. We have been talking a lot for some time about happy spatial planning, in fact that there's so much development occurring in our looking, and we're constant in our looking, and we need to be at the forefront of that because everything is very ad hoc in our view in terms of what happens. So we were surprised to see that initially without consultation that the site was named Hopo Whenua airport site. I can't remember exactly what, and that was because that's our confiscated land out there in our cultural lands named out there, and all that associated with a airport location. So we've made that clear as well. In terms of our whole environmental management plan, which is to be taken into account in these types of processes, we have objectives under that sort of infrastructure sections. And that kind of utilities and energies and infrastructure section, which talks about our participation in all decision-making processes, open plan, development, management, utilities, energies and infrastructure for our and that will participate in all of that and all of those decision-making processes from the outset. I've also mentioned in here we've discussed the climate emergency and the year of emissions reductions plan, which talks about working to decarbonise aviation and looking at other interregional travel options going forward. And we're concerned that expanding or building another regional airport is not necessarily in keeping with the direction that the direction of travel in terms of decarbonisation. And there are a lot of pressing issues such as housing that can be focused on. And also passenger rail should be looked at more closely. So in terms of effects, direct and indirect effects on our household, the material on the website had a range of measures or criteria that we utilised to assist with the location selections for a site. So I've already mentioned the location of sites of cultural heritage and ecological significance, and that is top exercise. That is not fully informed and has to be informed by anyone. So we did consider that our sites of significance, the Taitani areas at Takihiwa, Pukikau, Takihiwa ranges and Whangarei will be impacted. The locations of nearby schools, community facilities, great hubs and major infrastructure. From what I could make out from the what's on the website in terms of the footprint of the site, I think we're looking at about 1.2-ish kilometres to Whangarei Point School, and maybe around 1.7 to the Marae, Kohana, and Uruka, and Dunkai at Takihiwa. The footprint would obliterate the Mars and place in Takihiwa Rugby League grounds, the Rugby League club is the home to our Takihiwa Warriors and probably second over to the line in terms of the central hub meeting point and part of our identity, and has been for over 80 years. Concerned about the changes to Whangarei Point and Takihiwa roads, and the flight approach paths as mentioned trying to we consider will be detrimental on the baseline community of Takihiwa, no well-being of our client and Marae Whangarei. We're concerned about what the infrastructure and engineering issues would be, particularly in relation to the issues that have been had out in our area with peat and acid sulphate soils and what they would bring for the cost of the project. The footprint is very close to all the high end residential development that this council has enabled. So there's kind of a juxtaposition between heavy industry on one side and absentee, wealthy homeowners at Marsden Cove and places like that, but it just doesn't seem to sit well and be compatible with the airport in that location. So it's quite confusing for us. Talked about the alignment with government policy in terms of emissions reduction plan and the Climate Adaptation Act. From what my thinking is that whether this, obviously this will be a long process requiring designation, and by the time you got to consenting, the Climate Adaptation Act should be in play, and the other RMA reforms, which would, I think, would make it quite important this to maybe set this site. So that's probably the key things. I'll just finish by saying we have given a lot for the greater good of Whangarei District. I mean, we've pretty much lost all of our high beds to the port and the refinery and industrialisation at Whangarei. We've got the whole sort of Marsden Maritime Holdings area and huge canal development. We don't have a destination playground, we don't have a shared path, we don't have the infrastructure that the city has, the amenity and social, those kind of social things that have been cleaned and delivered on. Our probably key asset for our young community is the Whangarei Skate Park, which was sausage sizzled and cake stalled to get put into place. So yeah, I think we're not really keen on giving up any more of our time and our natural resources
Any questions for clarification from Julianne?
Nice to see you again. Just my, and I acknowledge all that we've been in here, but do you believe that Whangarei needs to have people? You just mentioned the need to have people in the Whangarei District. You think it's essential?
I don't know anymore. I don't know what's going to happen with the eternal in the future. I think that COVID and what's going to be going forward is going to have to be some meaningful changes. And I think that it may be that everyone is just equally, it may be that people have to travel by train. Every time I go try to travel out of Whangarei Airport, my flights get cancelled anyway, so I don't need to drive until I'm on. But I really couldn't tell you. I would hope that there'd be perhaps some more distributed transport networks, potentially coastal travel. But I haven't had we haven't got the resources to actually do a study into that. But I don't think it's going to continue. What I think it's safe to say is that it's not going to continue the way it is now. Domestic or international travel.
Any further questions or clarification? Thank you so much for all three of you for this submission. So our next submitter is Arthur Lay. His submission is in volume 6, page 207.
Good morning, Councillors. Thank you for your time. Listen about my solution. Show that I'm in support of the new report. Give you a little bit of background. I'm currently working as a service engineer. I'm currently working in our airports around the country doing all the security. We're looking at the plan that was put out and the sites that were selected. From my point of view, as an analytical view on one true point, it doesn't make sense to me to house the airport up. There's too much of a risk to our current import terminal. The Melbourne obviously the requirement, because it puts a lot of flight. So that to me is a real concern from an analytical risk point of view. Looking at the current Whangarei airport, there is a very small risk that will change in the distant future, where planes under 96 will require to stream. What this would mean is that the current airport will need to expand to cope with the new infrastructure that is required. And the alternative to that would be that it won't make sense to bring planes to 96 whilst in one day. That will have to increase the size of the aircraft to cover that increase in cost of having those planes stream. So that in itself could rule out Whangarei as ongoing. We're looking at the two sites horizontally. My preferred site is the horizontal site. My understanding is that the current designated length of the runway is 2 kilometres. For the current full movements a day that we're expecting on the current Whangarei airport, that's not a problem at all. But what it does lead to is a potential growth to the international market. I've identified within my submission that Boeing's Hamilton, Invercargill and Queenstown all have runways that are less than 2,000 metres long that are currently supporting international flights. It makes sense to have an international airport within Whangarei as a future option because it will lessen the time frame that it takes to travel from Whangarei to Sydney by 40 minutes and to the islands with that same feature, therefore increasing the saving in emissions of planes being in the air. Looking at the current site that you purchased land at, which is the horizontal site, I I did read a comment from the previous owner, Ray Caldwell, who indicated that 20 years in owner property, at no point in local Kiwi, not on his board, and identify sites of cultural significance within that area. So I totally agree that there's no issue with any sites of cultural significance in that area. I'm a resident of that area, and there's not been any talk of those kind of things out there. Going forward, they expect that the council, once they've decided on the appropriate site, will take the appropriate measures to look at the correct infrastructure, pipe, roading, power, sewers, the whole 9 yards to whatever site they pick. And of course this is going to lead into the environmental studies, because that's one of the things that people tend to complain about, because there's not enough information on environmental or infrastructure projects. But being the wise council that you are, you're not going to spend the county ratepayers' money really on integrating the studies for every site. You're going to pick the one site where it's going to start, and that's going to determine long term whether the site's actually viable. You can pick the site, do your infrastructure and environmental studies, and actually find the site's not actually suited. So it's not going to be all the end. Looking at the plan, and my understanding is that the site needs to continue for a period of time. So, I don't see any significant impact on the immediate future of what you guys are doing. And that long term, we need to get it right. We need to make sure that we've done the appropriate infrastructure and environmental impact studies to make sure that the site is physical. The current Whangarei site is a huge amount of houses around it, and bringing larger planes in, certainly cause a lot more distress to the residents out there than a rural setting that's like a Tonga. When you talk about environmental impacts, my thought is that a farm would have a larger environmental impact than an airport, which is going to be highly scrutinised under work safe and another EPA stuff in regards to environmental impacts. Whereas a farm, like such a hotel is probably better off as an environmental impact. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Dr. Councillor, any questions for Thank you very much for your submission. Good to see you again. Councillors, our next submitter is Equity, and submission is on line 1, page 8. Welcome, madam.
And with the start of 16th of February, on 16th of February, there's 9 fall days. April, 10 days. May, 11 days. March, 9 days. June, 9 days. And July, already 5 days. And if you look on the borders up there, there's a no, it is glass. The small front trees is for Whangarei. concerned is and was taken. And it was a really area. Yeah. What was, and what under Martha. And what the right thing here. Ready? And I want to say that it was a site over. If you look at the map on here, look at the space from here over to the left. All that space for the airport. And why don't we be proud? The shortest runway in New Zealand. And also, and another thing is, there's tours going around that land agent is agreed at one of the farms, he's offered some money for it, and he's letting, and at least there's free. That's a bad research, right? Rumors going around. Another thing about this is, every district fights against each other. Why shouldn't we have peace? One 3 point saying we're confident last month. And he doesn't know anything about that property. And the thing is, I know, because that farmer that owned it originally had sheep in the winter and cattle in the summer, because it's that wet. And if you come out to my farm and that, I have trouble trying to track without people animals. And I've got the biggest lot of animals in the total in my bush. My farm is the only farm that has not been had any subdivision on this. The only one. What a record! Everybody has to cut up. Why should we have to cut up everything? When the idea of the blocks and all that, I thought, why don't we go upwards? Why do we have to cut up all this land? Because this land feeds the people of the world. As far as I'm concerned, that the IRA should be number one, and the other three, no way. No way. And another thing I've heard, is flying boat coming into service. What's wrong with that? That won't cost you anything to land on. That lands on water. So why waste all this money and wait for the land agent is going around our district with an open checkbook. That checkbook come back to me and you. Who's going to pay for all this? And the neighbour, just see that agreement with my neighbour, read through that. It says about the boundary fence and all that. And the thing is, that neighbour has always been a bully to me. I don't know what to tell you, people all this. He's been a bully. The first thing he did, 2 lambs were under the fence at his place. What would 2 lambs eat? And the next thing, the land was put into his place. And I said to him, that's your problem, that's your fence, so fix it. And he took that survey that was done, he comes to me and he says, oh, you got 4 inches of my land. And I replied to him and said, you put up the fence, didn't you? And even when I spray my patches for weeds, oh, don't spray when the weeds grow. I spray when it goes in. It doesn't spray, but it's down onto the ground. And he said, you spray when the winds blow away from my place. Well, almost an end and here in the country. Yeah, or you might know that I'm supplying because of the outside, 2 or 3 of them together. So, if you complain about that, when it started, you had to put him on a roll and then there was another situation. He ran up to me and told me I was on the highway. How would you like that? He embarrassed himself because it was about fencing and a contractor making yards. And he said that I'd been spreading you. First of all, they said that I had demonstrated yards. I said, I had to be past them. I didn't look at them. And that's why they rang me up. You know, you could complain demonstrated fencing. I said, yes, I have. And that's a different subject. So I wouldn't care.
Councillors, any questions for Alan? Thank you very much for your submission.
Yeah, like an all shot.
Long history with that site. And thank you for your photographs.
Those like last to anybody. Because it's not touch your phone and everything. Yeah. You're right.
Councillors, our next submitter is Linda Lee, and this submission is in volume 4, page 166, Quilpit River.
So I think locally challenged games in our whole, so I'd like to start through. But I chose Australia to stay on that. It's all that I was proposing for small regional airport testing to a main regional hub for implementation. If that is the case, then that's completely different proposition. There is no business plan to show us. There's been no cost analysis of alternative options presented either. I'd just like to read my submission, and I'd just like to focus on things that I found in papers, because I chose not to resubmit, because it took so long to actually make documentations that were released, and after public consultation was closed, so we've been in 95 weeks. A lot of the documents still contain reactions. It was frankly a bit of a slap in the face, because further information and extension time had been requested by several interested parties, up to 9. The reason given to us by Law and Nixon at a meeting on Sunday, 22nd of May 2020, was because it fell into the 90-day election period. So I'm not sure how a decision can now be made in later August when that point also from the election period. But what I wanted to discover was the agenda for the 14th of April, which had the airport location study, statement of proposal. And when that came out, so I must have got this copy off the website and downloaded it. And there is a page and a half where it goes through the significance of engagement. And the concluding sentence of it said, while the focus of the current decision is the protection of the future airport site rather than relocation of the airport, the wider context of the airport as a strategic asset adds to the strength of the argument that the current decision is a significant one. Now, when I came to the meeting on the 14th of April, this was the copy I was given, and you can see my notes. And suddenly, it's all changed. Oh, it's not significant. No, this isn't a significant issue at all. Doesn't give rise to significance criteria. So then I went looking for your policy, 2020 significance engagement policy. And it's really interesting, in the 14 pages of basic writing on that, a scant half a page was given to the consideration of engagement and consultation. And quite frankly, I think that sort of sums up the feeling that I get about the public consultation of this project, this new project. The process looks and feels more like a tick box exercise than a genuine consultation. Council workshop of the 9th of December 2021 states in the section community engagement, compare the benefits of doing a three-side approach to a one-side approach. And of course, we understand by this stage, land has already been purchased. Benefits to both public feedback on the three preferred sites approach would reduce consenting risk and help RMA approval processes. Engaging in a one-side approach will be perceived as predetermination, and three sites apparently demonstrates a meaningful engagement when the public are able to provide feedback before the proposed site is confirmed. That is when it's actually taken from the documents that were released. Given that the land, as I stated, has already been purchased at Site 9, I think the submitters clearly see that Site 9 is being seen as a preferred location by Council, and that's actually confirmed on the papers because in that context that's what it said. So three preferred sites were reached, and they were notified by October 2018. So this has been kept secret for 5 years from the most important stakeholders, and that's the public, the landowners, and the residents directly affected. There are still so many things we do not understand, such as the vision of scope of the new airport. October 2018, the CEO was to meet with the Ministry of Defence. Possibility of naval-based relocation is mentioned. Will naval space be compatible with public use? Could a defence base be a special purpose vehicle/structure referred to in the papers? There's been no further mention of any discussion with the Ministry of Defence since then. Simon Wester was at the route on the event, I would call it an event because it certainly was a meeting, stated that Council wanted to buy 500 hectares of land, but he must have known that the property purchase estimates for sites 69 and 24A were 207, 327 and 175 hectares respectively. We now learn that as at February 2021, most of the aerodrome footprint has been secured. The total land purchase of 322.1 hectares with a further 128.5 hectares under negotiation, making a total area of 450.6 hectares. The minimum site identified by the legal report, the site line is 370 hectares. So what are Council doing for our futures to make us more resilient in the form of rising land taxes in the form of rates, food, petrol costs, food shortages, increased debt, increased unemployment? Potentially 450 hectares of farmland in the rural production zone, which is close to town, will potentially be removed from production in the looming economic crisis with fuel shortages and escalating prices. It just makes no sense. How is settling our future generations with even more debt than current levels sustainable, with interest rates rising and a looming economic crash? No doubt the Council's interest on foreign funds will increase, also potentially the strain on resources. Community has been told that any infrastructure costs such as upgrading roads will be funded through rates, and I don't believe that that messaging has been adequately relayed to residents of Whangarei. So in conclusion, as a submitter, I therefore yield to the will of the Council to decide to continue to operate from Whangarei. I also submit that the Mayor not use the casting vote to support any decision. I believe that any decision changing the status quo should have a majority of council support and should never rely on a casting vote from the Mayor. To do so, I believe, is to force your personal opinion on the subject and it's not representative of the people she is paid to represent. And lastly, in 2002, the local government moved from a representative to a participatory democratic model. We, the public, have still been acting like we're in a representative model, and I just want to let you know that there is certainly change and the status quo going forward is going to be more participatory. Thank you.
Councillors, any questions for the
Hello, it was a really interesting submission. Thank you for that. I would just, when you made comments about the fact that we will lose, a large area, possibly if whichever site we select, we will lose a large area of currently productive land, whether it's farmland. But I'm just interested to hear your thoughts, because other people say that having a regional airport is a massive economic stimulus. And so I'm just interested in, whether you think that will balance out. So we may lose a large area of productive farmland, but would the resulting economic activity from having maybe a larger airport balance that off? What do you think?
I'm not sure, because there's no business study to show us what the economic benefit will be. It all seems to be through kind of sky. I mean, New Zealand has said that they're not going to change the current department, or at least to the after 2030. And with all the COVID and the fuel restrictions and the price of fuel, I think we're just moving into a new era. And I think at the moment there's just too many unknown issues, with the whole, hydrogen, electric aircraft. I think what we're actually going to see is a more, as the previous guy alluded, having the airport, and on that, like, there are other international airports in New Zealand, but there have never been any international flights except out of major airports. So in Otago is an international airport, there's never been an international flight land or take off there. But I think what we have like is a new airport down at Parakai. There seem to be smaller hydrogen, sort of more helicopter type planes that can carry 12 people. And I think what's going to happen is people are going to be more focused on the travel from A to B. Like, if I go to, sometimes I'll have to go to business and be driven down, because it doesn't make sense to fly and then have to drive, and find a way to drive from the airport to the meeting. So I think that's what's going to be the future. People are just going to be more targeted about the way that they travel. I think so it's more. Yeah, so, thank you. Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you very much for your submission. This is our next submission is Bruce Loveback. Bruce's submission is in volume 7, page 22. Welcome, Bruce.
I'm Bruce Loveback. You shared a submission from every so half on there. So just to give you emphasize a couple of points on submissions and questions.
And speak to your submission. We're here to hear you speak to your submission.
Okay, so assuming that the comments from the EPA team in relation to the Marsden Point site was the only one that was capable of a short-term international airport, and also assuming the council is still keen on having cruise ships free from Marsden Point, and also encouraging further development around the Marsden Point area. Then my suggestion would be that the best site for that would be around 120. A couple of things as well. You'll be aware that New Zealand's goal is carbon zero by the national forest by 2050. In relation to that, there's only two real options if we're actually look at carbon zero without the level of carbon credits, and that would be hydrogen or electricity. The technologies here, and I think it'll be around 2035, there's a chance that it's going to require supporting facilities like hydrogen, electricity, and you'll be aware there's a rather large supply of electricity. I also understand the Indigenous thing called solar farm program, which to manufacture hydrogen, you're going to need electricity, and obviously you're going to use electric planes, you're going to need electricity. Also, just one thing I just want to clarify is I think we should be taking a very long-term view on this, so that we don't have any correct in terms of no decision about the Whangarei or Rotonga and then having to put additional support facilities or resources for infrastructure. Just one thing I needed in my submission, I understand is a carry tree that's about 3.2 metres or thereabouts. A bed that's 150 metres away from the centre line of the proposed airfield there, for a tiny completes. But yeah, if you're looking at international tourists, I'm suggesting that probably a lot of our tourists would be coming via Australia, so short-haul international would possibly help. Running around the tourist industry up to the region, certainly do. That's about all I've got.
Bruce? Questions for Bruce? Thank you for your submission. That's just next submitter is Neil Kempton. Neil's submission is in home pit, page 72. Welcome, Neil.
Yeah, my name is Neil Kempton and I've been a long time resident of Whangarei, and I oppose this equal state of Whangarei because the Whangarei District Council has made mistakes, as you can see on the first paper there, my sections on that old illustration of Whangarei. So I was actually residential area and planned for that years ago. And if you go to the next page, you can see the noise contours which were put in place 20 years ago. And there was a significant cost to the residents of that community. I'd just like to read out, at the moment there's a push, it's nearly a done deal, for helicopters in Kensington to come down around. Now, this is a document from which was all part of it. It's a conclusion. It's a resolution of conflict between Nest and the Kensington community will be, it will go on from the community and basically coming in the other community. Okay. So if you look at the second drawing here, and you got a 500 millimetre, a 500 metre circle. The first one you try to go Kensington, and you look at that, there's a 500 metre circle of the community around Kensington. And you go to Whangarei, and you'll see there's a 500 metre circle around the Whangarei community. And I've looked at that, and I find it hard to judge whether there's more houses or less houses. So the conflict is going to be exactly the same. And for that reason, I support the Rotonga 9 because it's ideal for helicopters and it's away from a residential area. That's about all I've got to say. Are there any questions, guys? Because this is stressing everybody out. While I'm stressed out about it, and a lot of our community out there are very stressed out about this whole business. And two wrongs don't make a right, and this is just wrong. And I'll just leave with you. You can ask questions. You got questions?
That's the same questions for you.
Yes, thanks. Yeah, thank you.
Neil, I know the submission you focused on the noise side, but in relation to Rotonga, you've highlighted that site as your preferred site.
Yes.
What are the main reasons for why you believe that's the best site out of the 3 other sites?
Because it's close to town, and also the other sites would be okay, but there's already been land purchased, so you don't go around and purchase more land. All 3 sites are very similar, I believe. But that one would be good for Nest because it's close to town, close to the hospital. And maybe, I don't know, maybe you've got to make a decision, decide it's probably best to have the helicopter space there. And then the NRA will do this, but my submission is for a common and good for helicopters, but it's not in a residential area.
And then what sort of time frame would you feel is acceptable for developing a new site? Knowing this is a long-term project, so it's...
A long-term project, well, within 10 years you would think it would be done, but as far as moving the risky helicopters down the range, the only solution there is to get all the medical transfers are done by SPAC in Auckland. It's the only solution, I believe. And then that would alleviate the burden on the Whangarei community. But yeah, 10 years, but to have 10 years of a Nest operating the same as it is in Kensington is totally unacceptable. It's unacceptable to be in Kensington and it's unacceptable to Whangarei. We're human beings, we're entitled to an honest state.
Any other questions for you? Thank you for your submission. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
Councillors, our next submission is the next submission is in page 205. Welcome, Mayor.
Thank you very much.
Good morning. My name is Anne Holman. I'm the primary regional representative of Future National Trust, and I'm speaking to you today about the submission that Q2 is put in regarding the airport, and it's just for the Whangarei West site, and mainly because, or only because, there are Q2 covenants associated with that proposal. And so what I thought I'd do is show you some photos. I hope they come out okay. The property in question is called Life Farm, and there are 3 covenants of that property. And that photo there is the one that is closest to the proposed airport, and these are all fairly small, but they are significant for their values, the biodiversity values, and as Q2 we are bound to protect the perpetuity for the landowners. Now that small one is what you call a volcanic broadleaf forest, dominated by tundra and terrain, and it's fairly typical of those areas out towards, out to the west, of the volcanic area. They're all tend to be very small remnants, very important for wood pigeon. They provide their main winter food, which is terari berries. And so what we have is the cluster of covenants out that way, with pigeons flying between. So that is a big issue. I just threw in the map there on the topography. You can see A is the one that is closest to the actual airport, proposed airport. B is very small remnant, but it's alluvial river, forest, kaipatia and matai. And the one to the north there is a large piece, which is also down by the river, and it has wetlands and kaipatia remnants in there as well. So it's on the edge of the volcanic, it's where the springs come out, and of course quite a lot of kaipatia, which is another major food for the pigeons. This is a slightly wider view showing the yellow, is showing existing covenants in the area. And if you look to on the right hand side, where those the longer pieces, those are really high, and those ones are flying. You know, if you think of wood pigeons, they're all flying between those trees. So yeah, it could be quite an issue for an airfield, having slow, low flying hoop bar coming through. So yes. I put together, I went back through the files. I was involved in putting these covenants on Sam Airy, who recently died. We're looking at right by the township here on the right hand side, and then looking across the valley. This is the typical vegetation. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but a lot of gully going in the understory, a lot of terrarium happening. It's a working dairy farm, so you know, races going right by. This is that first one on the first page. Understory is coming away well, and even though it's a small region, it's doing pretty good. These photos are further down in that alluvial floodplain area. We have Karangatia and Matai. This area is down by the river, which is wetland that is coming back. It was raised, so now we've got the sedges and Macarena, rubiginosa coming back. A lot of dog irrigating shrubs. This is a very rare habitat as well. Very little of it left near the Whangarei River. This is on the terraces right next to the river. Some of the Macarena is on the left-hand side, so that's the peat forming sedge. Helps with water quality, retains water, retains nutrients. There's just a few more of the dog-irrigating plants that are within that wetland area. The top is Nursini dog-irrigata, weeping matipo, Caprosma rigida, and Caprosma parviflora, with a rare regional representation on the left-hand side. And there's a lot of species diversity in these little remnants. A lot of filmy ferns. Yeah, so it's right by the river. And that's really, I just wanted to give you a sort of a feeling for what we're about in protecting these areas for landowners. And QE2 really is opposed to this site, the airport being located here in such close proximity to those habitats. And I leave it there. Yeah.
Again, the presentation before, but I was more, when I went through the submission, it didn't actually give me an indication. Like Tim, you didn't want that site. Which site would you prefer? Going that you know who works in forest and things like that. So I was trying to get that into the submission.
I felt that we were talking to 9 months, really seemed like quite a site as well. And certainly in those areas, you know, there are no governments around site line, and there are no governments around the other side as well. So, you know, that's really what our comments are about. And I think one of the other things that we said, you know, in the submission, was that there was a lack of information. We had a lack of information, ecological information in your reports. We were really surprised that none of these covenant areas were actually picked up as significant sites in your documents, and yet you have all that information to hand. So, yeah, I think we should be looking more at that kind of thing if you're going to be in great depth looking at these sites. Yes, Councillor Peters.
Thank you for that. That's really useful.
Are there, if we did have the airport there, are there other airports where they have mitigated the effects of an airport close to sites of significance for flying birds?
I can't answer that question. I don't know. But, you know, that may be something that should be asked of head office, because there may be similar things that happen in other parts of the country. I think that's a valid question. But you visualise the people that are flying through those areas. I mean, you only have to drive out and you see them coming across the roads, and those are the covenants. There's a lot of other vegetation, pockets of vegetation out that way with those birds that are moving between them.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess similar to council meetings, that's my thinking too, like we talked about the movement of biodiversity within those covenants. But I guess in my mind, it must be coming from further afield, and I would be interested to know when you look at the big, on Google Maps, big blocks of native forest, are they moving across the other alternative side, back towards the district? So we've actually, I'm really glad you've come today. I suppose it's not so much of a question, but it's a bit more homework that you've triggered me to go.
There have been some reports done, research done on Kukupā in that area by reindeers and using at conservation, because that area out that way is a stronghold called Kukupā and it could be worth looking at and maybe getting an update. Because with the increased pest control that's going on around Whangarei, our Kukupā population is growing, which is how we're looking for food. Very good, thank you.
Any further questions for me? Thank you for making the time to come and speak to us today. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Councillor, next speaker is Barry Pyle. Barry was going to be bundled into the next grouping, but he's agreed to come and speak to us too. So welcome, Barry. Barry's submission is volume 8, page 198.
Thank you. My written submission speaks for itself, and I'd like to highlight some points. Regarding the 1 Point West proposed site, this site isn't suitable for several reasons, including the proximity to existing and growing urban areas from 1 Point to Marsden Cove, which come right up to the boundary of the proposed site, the low-lying topography of the proposed site, with parts of a tsunami evacuation zone, some areas prone to flooding and being overall only a few metres above sea level. The underlying layered sandstone substrata with numerous freshwater tables and aquifers, which are part of the ecology of the area. And the transmission of noise such as takeoffs and landings through the substrata, which will affect the habitability of nearby homes and other buildings, which I experience daily with heavy vehicles using the road outside my house. Regarding the Whangarei location, I submit that the airport should remain in Whangarei because it is closest to Whangarei City and current access could be improved by road, water and light rail which was there in the past. It should be possible to provide or subsidise sound insulation for homes in the vicinity, starting now. The main issues I'd like you to address include: I submit that the proposal to find a new Whangarei airport location is premature, especially considering changes in aircraft technology. I have heard from a reliable source that Air New Zealand is considering transition from fossil fuel jets and other propeller aircraft to electric for short-haul flights in the foreseeable future. I recently read an article on the future of sustainable aviation in an asset publication tech briefs, and it suggests that smaller for a regional airport like Whangarei, smaller aircraft mean more frequent flights, which saves time to make connections at larger airports like Auckland. The availability of reasonable sized short-haul electric aircraft will allow smaller airlines to serve places like Whangarei more effectively and with lower emissions. Air New Zealand is also negotiating with Airbus for hydrogen-fueled long-haul aircraft. It is most likely that facilities for this will be located at larger international airports such as Auckland. The accelerating program of developing and bringing into service more efficient and lower emitting aircraft, and even the possibility of vertical takeoff vehicles, is why I submit that the proposal to relocate Whangarei is premature. In addition, it is critical that Auckland District Council and the Regional Council move promptly to develop a fully integrated transport plan, including rapid passenger rail services, as well as freight, improved roading, and incorporating water-based services such as fast ferries from Auckland and going north, and water taxi systems in Whangarei Harbour. These could connect at the airport to provide seamless services like those available by air and rail in Europe and elsewhere. Another issue to be addressed is the relocation of helicopters, in particular emergency services for Whangarei and Auckland. Whangarei is not suitable, so an alternative site should be located urgently. In conclusion, I submit that Whangarei Airport should remain in Whangarei in the foreseeable future until new aviation technology that reduces emissions are closer to coming into regular service. A far-sighted integrated transport plan should be developed from Auckland, including relocation of emergency services. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Questions for Gary? Thank you for your submission and thank you for today. That's the final submission in this earlier block for today. The next people will be coming for an 11 o'clock start. So I suggest we take a break and reconvene at 11 o'clock. Thank you. It is interesting in the future, maybe Yes, on the live stream. Councillors, we are back into hearing from our submitters, and for those submitters who haven't heard the nice sort of spiel at the beginning, we have a 5-minute slot for each of these submissions. At the end of that, councillors are available to ask questions for clarification. So our first submitter this afternoon is John Whangarei, and he's also representing the Whangarei Flying Club. Very warm welcome to you, John. Please come forward. John's submission is in volume 10, page 139.
Thank you, councillors, and if I can just clarify one point to start with. I was told that we had 10 minutes as an organisation rather than as an individual, but I'm going to give you a very brief off-the-cuff comment and leave it.
Yes, my understanding is that some people were given that information that if they represent an organisation they can have up to 10 minutes, and given that we have had some cancellations, I think I'll allow that if you're prepared for that. Councillors, hopefully you'll agree with my decision there.
Over to you.
Okay, thank you. I will just go through the submission. Thank you to the Council for making available the additional information, the historic detail that's been gone into by your consultants. By way of introduction, I should say that although I'm now retired and the Secretary for the Whangarei Flying Club, I've spent 3 decades with the Ministry of Transport, 2 of those focused on aviation and transport technology issues. I've even been the acting manager of an airport, led the New Zealand delegation of the International Civil Aviation Organisation, dealt with many and varied aviation policy issues over the years. I'm also involved in the Royal Aeronautical Society in New Zealand, and I'm conscious that I'm trying to stick to my Whangarei Flying Club remit, but I do have some wider expertise. A little bit about the club. We have anywhere up to 150 members. We have 2 aircraft in a hangar on the Whangarei Airport, and a 3rd under construction. We've got a kit set being built, assisted by high school students in the back of our hangar at the moment. Despite COVID, we've been doing relatively well. We're looking to replace one of our aircraft. And we do have the hangar and club rooms on the site under a lease to the airport, joint venture entity with the land. Just running through the structure that was presented as part of the consultation. The Ruatongata West site, we can see no benefits that are not secured by the Whangarei or Ruatongata sites. It's quite remote. We really do question the weather conditions out that far, given its location next to the Wairua River in terms of fog, etc. We note, though, that the weather conditions there are probably better than the One Tree Point West site that's also under consideration. Throughout the consultants' work, we note that the standard way of operating general aviation around an airport involves a rectangular sort of circuit pattern that we fly on either side of the runway unless there are noise restrictions. This doesn't seem to have been taken into account in the consultants' work, although we note that on the obstacle diagrams that have been presented to you by the consultants, they do also show those height intrusions out to the parallel with the runways. We are left concerned that the consultation presentation hasn't actually reasonably represented where you can expect noise from aircraft to come from. We also note bird hazards as being a significant factor for aviation operations. And the third sort of generic concern we have is there is no provision in the proposed sites for grass crosswind runways. If I can give you some examples, both Kerikeri and Kaitaia airports have grass runways orientated differently from the main runway. If you go down to Tauranga, there are 3 grass runways. Hamilton has 2. It's quite common, and of course at Whangarei we have 1 grass crosswind runway. Yet in the proposals presented to us for consultation, there seems to be no provision for those crosswind runways. Also a generic point with the options is the land transport links to and from the airports, whether there would be public transport available or active, in other words, cycling, walking, etc., transport options available. Turning to the Ruatongata site, where the council has taken up the option of purchasing land, we see few benefits that are not secured by using the Whangarei site, there would clearly be provision for runway in safety areas, and in that respect I should note that my involvement in runway in safety areas goes back to the 1980s and helping produce a report on the subject about Wellington Airport, which a couple of decades later came to fruition. In the unlikely event that Air New Zealand wished to operate A320 aircraft or similar jets to Whangarei, clearly Ruatongata is the best solution. The question of financing your new airport is obviously of some concern, and I just raised in passing the thought that given what has been done to try and attract the Navy to Marsden Point, whether the Air Force might be interested in rebasing from Whenuapai, where there is obviously particularly valuable potential urban land that they're occupying in Auckland. Key concerns about the site are still the distance out from Whangarei's urban area, the CBD. If you look at comparable locations around the country, even Hamilton Airport, which is quite out, rural area, is a shorter distance out, and the cost of upgrading existing roads would have to be considered. Given that this is the most likely alternative site, I do question what commitments you've got in terms of financing. Whangarei Airport, as you know, is a joint venture with the Crown, and the reason it's still a joint venture and hasn't been corporatised is that it's not really a commercial proposition given the volume of traffic going through. Also, clearly, as with any major project, there is a risk to with escalation of construction costs. The site is also remote from something that consultants didn't seem to take into account at all. The Whangarei Flying Club's designated low flying zone. We use the area over the south side of the Whangarei Harbour between One Tree Point and Limestone Island for training pilots how to operate at low level in emergency caused by bad weather. We think that site, because of the lack of people around, is suitable, but that would be quite some distance from Ruatongata and clearly conflicts with the One Tree Point West site. From a purely self-interested point of view, the club has a concern about the costs of moving its hangar. We have a lease. The leases apparently for the hangars vary, and our lease would require us at our own cost. We're not that wealthy to disassemble our hangar and potentially reassemble the hangar out at Ruatongata. I've raised the circuit issue. I've also raised the weather conditions issue. We would expect the site to be foggier. Clearly bird hazards would be a consideration, but that's for further investigation. And we would be looking for a crosswind runway, although the orientation of the runway at Ruatongata site is clearly better than the one at One Tree Point. Again, questions of land transport links. We do have, for example, people that fly into Whangarei, hop on their folding bike, or pull out of their aircraft and actually use the cycleway into town. The One Tree Point West site, we were actually quite surprised it made the cut in terms of being a location. Its one potential benefit is being next to residential and industrial area that's fast developing, but then the flip side of that is that residents who built without knowing that there would be an airport there would be quite understandably concerned about noise. This is the one that we have most concern about consultants not taking into account aviation considerations in raising the issue, the option. As even yachties know, the prevailing winds around Marsden Point area can be quite problematic, and you already have wind data for Marsden Point. the runway is not orientated towards the prevailing winds. It's also located close to a restricted flying area over Marsden Point, which is up to 3,500 feet, where you're potentially going to be operating in a circuit which has to avoid that, flying over tanks with refined petroleum, probably a very low risk but high potential of a major disaster if an aircraft crashed into those tanks. Is that a 1 minute warning?
That is your 10 minutes.
Okay, right. So basically, as the submission goes on, we favour maintaining the Whangarei site and believe that there are technological options coming down the track that will mean that that is perfectly feasible. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Councillors, questions for clarification. Councillor Murphy.
Thanks, John. You did describe it, thank you for your high quality submission. You did say earlier that Whangarei will be fine unless Air New Zealand do end up moving to the bigger planes, in which case you thought that Ruatangata would be needed. So I was just looking for your thoughts around the value of actually designating that land now to future-proof it.
I think keeping up your option, look, I'll speak not as Whangarei Flying Club, but as someone with considerable experience. Our thinking at the Ministry of Transport was keeping options open like that a very good idea. And clearly the potential of that site, if you had to move, it's the best option apart from Whangarei. And I think the council's been quite wise to buy land there. We do have a few reservations or question marks about it, whether obstructing terrain to either side, etc. But potentially it's quite a good option. In fact, informally, I'd like to present the idea to you. Would the council be prepared to put a grass strip in there in advance of putting a main airport there? Because we would use it for training purposes. It would be a safer option than the strips that we use and the beaches that we use.
Thank you for that. Any other questions of John? Councillor Reid.
Thank you, John. Just a point of interest, and I hope that it never ever occurs. In your considered opinion, seeing as how you've got this knowledge, what do you think would happen with our airport at Whangarei if there was to be a plane crash there?
Well, with any plane crash, it's potentially a significant disaster. In terms of aircraft going off the end, which is clearly a concern, it would have to be exceptional circumstances that cause that. But having said that, an example from many years ago was at Wellington Airport. A Viscount did go off the end because it was going at slow speed. No one was hurt. There's a magnificent photo of the aircraft at quite an angle down the slope. The airline, Air New Zealand, obviously know the risks there, and it's a captain-only landing at Whangarei, but they do it pretty well. The uncertainty is obviously the council's picked up with Air New Zealand is what future aircraft they will use. If you go on what they have now, they want to put the ATR in, they are payload restricted, but in 10 years' time, I think there are options, particularly given if they walk the walk, they talk about sustainability, they will be looking at options like electric aircraft. And certainly there's a Swedish 4-engine aircraft, electric, that would happily fit within Whangarei's runway. Sorry, I ran it on a bit.
Thanks, John. You made a comment earlier at the beginning, and I'm sorry I'm not very technological, but it was about the Ruatangata side of things, saying something that you thought we hadn't our consultants hadn't taken into account?
Well, there are maps they've produced of obstacles, in other words, where the terrain, potentially houses, comes up to exceed the what they call the fans from the ends of the runways. What doesn't seem to have received much attention, but it is shown, is the circles around the airport runway off to the sides. Now, if I'm flying into land at Whangarei, what I do is I come in out about as far as Limestone Island, come around, turn, and this is a standard way of flying all around the world. Turn in and...
that type of...
yeah, it's a rectangle.
Okay.
So you're flying ideally out to both sides if there is an obstacle, or if there is a residential area you want to protect from noise, as is the case in Whangarei. You can do it to one side of that airport runway. But that consideration doesn't seem to have been taken into account. From my quick read of what's been done, they've focused on Air New Zealand's requirements using instrument approaches. And having said that, I worked on a project which, sorry, jargon, but satellite-based augmentation system that makes the instrument approaches much more flexible potentially. So, for example, at Queenstown now, they fly into the side of the north end of the Remarkables, and it isn't a straight-in approach. They're doing multiple minor adjustments, and they're basically letting the aircraft fly itself. So the potential to avoid such obstacles from 2025 is going to be there. And we had a major project going. I was on the working group for called New Southern Skies, which was all about taking advantage of these technologies to enable, in my view, provincial airports to have much more reliable service in bad weather, because you could, without installing expensive ground aids like at Auckland Airport, you could allow satellite-based navigation down to runway level. So the flexibility will be there, it's not there yet, to allow things like curved approaches, etc.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Any further questions? John, thank you for your submission.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your time today. Councillors, our next submitter is Shante, and she'll be speaking to two submissions, so please come forward. Shante, the first is in volume 2, page 148, and the second for page 1A. And are you going to keep them separate?
I'll try.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Does my time start now?
Hi.
Okay. I wasn't too sure if there was a toru. Okay, kia ora koutou katoa. As you all know me, Shante Konakingi. I'm actually a resident of Bara I Tunua, Church Road. I'm married into the whānau that's been there for over 7 generations. So we've definitely seen our rohe change dramatically in regards to the new developments out our way. Regarding my submission for today for the airport, it was to oppose the airport suggestion. And I know this process was not actually, it was led by the Local Governments Act, where it wasn't about a yes or no process. It was about being informative about things. That was my understanding when the consultants came out to see us. So the Local Government Act was actually driving the process and the consultation process. And I guess hence the reason why the lack of information was required, because in that process, what I understand, this is not about a no or yes process, as I've said. What we were advised was more about getting information from the public and identifying things that they may have missed. And then I also understood from the consultants that the RMA process would be led in a different form where you would require more information, which is a lot of the information everyone's been asking for, like in regards to the environmental impacts, you know, just to list some, which I'm sure you guys have heard them all today, be like an X factor, I bet. So, you know, the noise levels, the air levels, the waterways, the river takes, the taonga species, tuna, manu, native, ngahere, smell, human lifestyle, our culture of sites of significance, traffic movements, all those things. Like, you would have heard that today. So I guess everyone has been asking for that, but a part of the Local Governments Act, it doesn't need that to drive this process. So the RMA process is going to drive that process, which is not till the next stage. To me, as a local, and I just thought that was a real backwards way of doing this process, because the investment is so huge that we're wasting money in places in regards to the local government process. I don't understand why we didn't just go straight to the RMA process, because then that would have answered and would have stacked up a case on why this airport is about future-proofing Whangarei. So that was just one of my concerns, and I understood that from day dot when the Campbell and his team came out to visit us, because those were the questions we were asking, and you've heard it all day today. And I guess the investment that was said to us was $150 million. And that was like, that's quoting 2 years ago. We all know that the surplus has gone up at least 30% now. So you can't even get wood or materials for steel at what you would have got 3 months ago. So our economy is even rapidly changing in that. So I'd imagine that investment's now higher. Everyone's already asked the question, who's paying for this airport? And we still don't know that yet, because that'll come in the RMA process. One of my concerns, which I did say in my submission, was about the council's lack of meaningful engagement from Māori and the up-and-coming submissions. It was about how in 2014 you had a Manu advisory group that was led in this airport conversation back then. They were confined to actually share information in respect of why they were picked to sit in this group, and then they were held to confidentiality to not be able to share anything until further process was dealt with along that process. Now that was done, and that was in 2014. Hence the reason in my submission you would see that I mentioned many articles in regards to how we were alienated back in 2014 about this process for our Māori communities. And that was a concern for me as an individual, because we were putting them at risk, our people that were on that tipu, opposed to them being held accountable if any confidentiality information was shared. And I thought that was not nice for them, because they're getting that beat with the stick from Hapu now, saying if you knew that, why didn't you share that then? So, you know, I think the process that was dealt with in 2014 was not nice. So I just wanted to make sure that we don't repeat that in this next process that we're most probably going to go down. The other thing for me in here was, I believe Whangarei is suitable. I'm not going to talk to any other airport or any other space in the submission, because one, I do not live in Ruakaka and I do not live around there, so I don't feel I have a right to actually say the airport needs to go there, because I don't live there and I'm not going to be impacted. So I just want to make that clear that I'm not choosing any other airports here today. I'm actually just going to stay with Whangarei, because I believe it's fit for purpose for what we need now. So I believe Whangarei is suitable for the now. Future-proofing for Whangarei for the airport is a bit premature at this stage, as our electric world is evolving, and we are a few years away, 2040, we will see a 100-seater passenger plane that our Whangarei airport could handle, and that's going to be electric. And I did hand that out when I requested for an extension in regards to that information. So I don't have any handouts today. And I believe future-proofing Whangarei is not an airport. We have bigger things to worry about as councils, and just how you sit on this tepu. The other thing is I wanted to note is that I believe the process, we had 520 people take part of the submission. I've spoken to a lot of people that didn't bother putting in a submission because they said the council will just do what they want to do. And I heard that many times, and I thought, well, if you don't put it in, then you're showing me you don't care. And they said, oh no, we don't, we care, it's just, that's just a waste of time. So I just want that noted too, because I don't believe the 521 submissions that were put in were a true reflection of this process. I believe there was many more that wanted to have a say or object, but they just didn't bother, which is sad, because us in the community would have expected more people than 521 people putting in submissions. And that doesn't counteract the reason why a decision should be made that, well, only 521 people applied or submitted, so I think the rest of the community of Whangarei want an airport. I don't believe that's the message we should be taking, or have that implied with the small submissions we did get.
John, I might just need to encourage you to talk to the second submission, just so that we can get time.
Okay, that's cool. Okay, so I guess for the second one, I'm a part of the Ngāra Trustee Marae. It sits, I guess that's Ngāti Kahua Toronare Ngāti Parawhau is the hapu of the rohe, and that is our marae, Te Paia. I sit there as a trustee, and I guess this whole airport situation for us is definitely, we don't want to airport in our rohe because we already see the environmental impacts that surround us. And as a kaitiaki in our area, we already see devastation with the pump stations that we currently have that are killing our tuna. Seeing an airport in our rohe, to me and to us as a trustee, is sort of missing the punch. We're going straight to an airport where we needed investment for the depot, and we're in the same catchment. We're talking about the same catchment area. So that sort of gets up our noses as trustees that we're investing in a big investment on an airport where we have other areas where this money could be well spent. The other thing is that I don't know if any of you guys have read it, but it only just came out in April 2022, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. It's only just come out from government, and I believe that as councillors you should read this, because I believe that part of the process that we're going to be going through the next round is that tangata whenua need to be sitting on these tepus. We need to be seen as a co-governance when it comes to decision making. This process hasn't really allowed us that. The consultation process was just like, it felt like a tick in a box exercise, which we all understand that, because that's how we always feel when it comes to consultation for Māori. So a strong consensus from Ngāti Kahua Toronare is that if this does go to another round, just because we're opposing doesn't mean we don't want to be a part of the actual bigger picture, because we need to be there whether we like it or not. The sites of significance have never been identified throughout these reports because, one, the consultants have never actually come to us to actually talk about those things. And I guess that will come in the next round in regards to the RMA report. And I guess the other thing for this airport is that I don't believe it's going to be very beneficial for us to be thinking in these terms now. It may take 3 more council terms before we actually get to a consensus of needing an airport. But for the time being, I don't believe an airport is the answer for future-proofing Whangarei. Kia ora.
Councillors, any questions for clarification from Shante on either of those submissions?
Is that good or bad?
It's good. Shante, thank you so much for your submissions and for your time here today.
No worries, thank you.
Councillor, I'll take this opportunity to just note that Councillor Holst is apologies for the rest of the afternoon, as has Councillor Golightly. Our next submitter is Lisa Clooney. Lisa, welcome, and Lisa's submissions are in volume 2. And there are 2. Lisa took the opportunity to submit once and then again. Good for you. So Lisa, over to you.
Okay, kia ora. First of all, I'd like to tautoko what Shantae said, and my name's Lisa Clooney. I live in Hikurangi, and I'm representing as an individual here. And I have submitted twice on the airport consultation document, and I also spoke to council about the extension of the time frame. So today I'd just like to talk about my reasons for why I believe the airport should stay at Whangarei. And I'll talk about the reasons for this, largely the environmental impacts and how we can mitigate those. And for me, I believe the best option to do so is to leave the airport at Whangarei. Also due diligence. I'm concerned that, as you will see in my submissions, that due diligence was not undertaken in terms of environmental reports before this went out to the public, but also, as Shantae alluded to, or spoke specifically about, is talking to people, and particularly mana whenua, in a way that was open and transparent and in true recognition of the partnership between Māori and Pākehā. And 3, I don't think it's necessary. I believe, as the first speaker referred to, that the consultation document is based on Air New Zealand's proposal, and it doesn't consider the future of aircraft technologies, and that WDC has more pressing concerns if it's going to attend to issues to do with sustainability and climate change, as it says it is doing in the long-term plan, such as the flooding out in the Hikurangi swamp at the moment. Okay, so the ongoing issues out in our airport and its poor health. And so yes, I also agree that the Whangarei District Council should be walking the talk and considering other options. Okay, so I'll talk about each site and why I think not, and then I'll finish with Rondahi. So Ruatangata, the 2 Ruatangata sites, I don't believe that they are a good option, because we need to think about the environment holistically, and the upper catchments that feed into the Hikurangi Airport and the Wairua go out to the Kaipara, and the Kaipara is an incredibly important harbour, and they say that 80% of West Coast snapper comes from the Kaipara. So any impact on the environment, you've got to think it's not just about our local aotearoa, it's the wider environmental impact. So it's not just thinking about Whangarei, we've got to think about what we're contributing to other parts of the country. So you'll see in my submission, my second submission, I talk specifically about the Kaipara. And one of the other issues I have about the environment is light pollution, but also when you look at the Civil Aviation Authority guidelines to prevent bird strike, they actually actively promote poisoning and disestablishing bird sanctuaries and bird nesting around airports. So they're talking about using vermicides and so forth in the soil. So that is all going to ultimately end up in our river, and it's going to end up in the Kaipara. So it's thinking about the environment in these types of ways. The other issue I have, and allude to my second submission, is the lack of data on crosswinds and atmosphere. We contacted NIWA, given that we were given an extension of the time frame, and they said, to their understanding, neither the Whangarei District Council or BECA actually contacted them for specific atmospheric or wind data pertaining to any of those airport sites. Now, I would have thought that would have been a necessary part of research before this went out to the public. Light pollution is a major issue for bats, for birds, for all sorts of animals. And so, obviously, the 2 Ruatangata sites have direct impact into the repo and into the waterways. With One Tree Point, again, as Shantae said, it's not our area. So, but I do believe with sea level rise, it's crazy to be putting an airport at One Tree Point, even though it feels like there is infrastructure there. I still believe that the best option would be for it to stay at Whangarei, and to allow for the future of aircraft technologies to find out what's actually going to happen if shorter runways are going to be possible. And it's not just about big planes. And also, we say a lot of people who come to our area come for the environment. So why actively go out and build and destroy other environments when we've actually got something that exists for now? And I think the other thing in terms of engagement with people, as Shantae said, the fact that that Mana Whenua advisory group was bound by a confidentiality clause, I find that problematic. And I just would urge you as councillors to think about how it is for us as people, is to treat us as you'd like to be treated if it was your backyard. And I know you're acting here and you have a role and you've got decisions that need to be made, but think about what it's like when you go home and what would be happening in terms of your whānau and your family and your livelihoods. In terms of, for example, the farmers out in the swamp, are they going to suddenly be told when they can harvest their crops or what they can do, as is referenced in the CAA guidelines to prevent wildlife and preventing birds from congregating around airports? So it's thinking about the environment and thinking about people, and thinking about communicating openly and transparently with us. And I would just like to finish with thinking about, I sent through a document after the last time I submitted, which was regarding decolonisation. Whangarei, almost a third of Whangarei's population are Māori, and we have an opportunity to look at the processes, the way we engage with people, and to make sure that we're not always using colonial tools that are going to be putting people at a disservice. So I'd like to quote from that. And so what is decolonisation? So it's when one nation is colonised by another as development is driven by the culture of the coloniser rather than the original peoples. This process is often violent and tries to dispossess people of their land, culture, identity and practices. Okay? So I'm just reflecting back on what Shantae said before. And in terms of how can we imagine our decolonised city, this document came from the Wellington City Council, is one of the most important tasks that any urban designer should undertake is consultation, meeting and including the various communities and populations that live in the area. This is also an important task for researchers who will find their results are much stronger when placed within the context of the place that they're investigating. And the UN describes the process of decolonisation as involving the coloniser allowing the Indigenous people self-determination. So I would say the Council has an opportunity to actually do due diligence, talk to Mana Whenua, actually, allow them to have some say in terms of their terms, their processes, their time frame, especially if it's to do with the environment, their whenua, and I think that's about everything I need to cover.
Good, Lisa. Councillors, questions of clarification, please, sir? There are none. Thank you so much for both of your submissions and for taking the time today. Councillors, our next submitter is Pat Napier, and Pat is joining us from Teams. Hello, Pat. Very nice to see you, and the submission is in volume 6, page 154, and this is for multiple. Hello, Pat, over to you.
Firstly, is the sound okay?
It's not too bad.
Okay, the sound. I think I'm getting echo, but that's alright. Firstly, thank you for the opportunity to make the submission through internet. It's appreciated. I wouldn't have been able to make a submission otherwise because I'm a carer, full-time carer for someone that basically totally interferes with needs. So my name is Pat Napier. My marae is Kota Marae Tikoki. I made this submission on behalf of Kota Marae because they asked if I could make a written submission and then also an oral submission. I also have permission from the Whangarei District Council who represents the tribe Marae called Whangarei. that they also support my submission. So basically, I personally airport going to accommodate either side, mainly because of the negative environmental impact. I think the other two speakers before me have already covered all the points about the negative environmental impact, so there's no need for me to repeat that, I think. In terms of Takihiwa, having the airport out there, as I'm told, the same as the area that's up to the local there to make the submission on that. However, the Patriarchy decides to make a submission ourselves, we would support whatever they decide. In terms of Whangarei, I appreciate that the airport is probably going to be much too small in the near future for what we need, and there is a need for a bigger airport, airfield. So I appreciate why the council's looking for some suitable sites. I think that the conundrum is wherever you go, you're going to get these the feedbacks about the negative environmental impact. So, although there is going to be a negative environmental impact, especially on our waterways, which is probably our main concern here in Ontario, it's going to happen when the decide to locate an airport at the I think that's about it. The rest of my written submission. So it's mainly because of the negative environmental impact that we made that submission. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Pat. Councillors, any questions for Pat for clarification? Yes, I'm looking around the room, Pat, and it looks like nobody's indicating they need clarification. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Carol, thank you for the opportunity.
All the very best.
Okay.
Councillors, our next submitter is Tamihana Paki. Tamihana's submission is in volume 8 and page 45. Welcome, Tamihana. Kia ora.
Excuse me a few moments, I'm just locating my page.
Gives us a chance to note to find our page too.
Tēnā koutou Council. I'll just introduce myself, where I come from and what I'm about. My name is Tamihana Paki. I live in Takihiwa. And I am part of the mana whenua, tangata whenua, that other contributors have been referring to as Patuharakeke, and no doubt other tribes as well. I'm descended from a number of significant rangatira who lived and had power and authority in that area known as Marsden Point, Popo, Whenua, Ruakaka, those areas there, and in respect of the site where the proposed Marsden, One Point Airport is subject to number 3 in the rankings from the Civil Aviation, I understand. My tupuna who were present before and after the treaty, Mate, he lived at Takihiwa at times, But he had a rather large domain to care for, and that domain extended from the Mangaka here to near to the Kaipara in the regions around Helensville. And the centre of the southern extremities was Puataka, regarded by Ngāti Hine to our hearing to the north as a Ngāti Hine marae. His Mate's role in that part of the world was to ensure Ngā Puhi expansion did not go further southwards into Auckland and disturb the settlements there. Mate's first wife was Te Hauauru. She was one of the 3 wives of the tupuna Tiraro Kukupa, one of the most important players in the Whangarei District. He spread his legs over the east coast and the west coast, and the Tangihua Ranges were in the centre of it. Now, my other tupuna is Motutara. Motutara and Tiraro combined in the last Taitokerau expedition that came out of the Whangarei Harbour to invade the Waikato. They were a bit disappointed. Tainui was loaded with guns, and it was not a hongi. It was not a hongi hiko or hone heke feast. My other tupunas are Te Prerehi. He was descended from Motutara's sister, Te Poho. And basically, he lived around in his later life, he lived in the area which we now know today as Takahiwa. Takahiwa, in my knowledge, is that area which lies south of the Toitoi district, just north of Whangarei, south to the Brandurans, and this side of the eastern side of the Tangihua area. My other tupuna of significance is Tauwhitu. Tauwhitu was often associated with the Pittman family. My great-great-grandmother, Ani Te Maru Wharaaitu Tauwhitu, was the first person to be interned when she died in the Urupā at Takahiwa, at present-day Uraparas. She's the first one buried there. Her husband, Ben Pittman, a person who fought or engaged in the wars at Ruapekapeka with Kawati, against Kawati, was her husband. And they had a huge number of children and descendants, probably rating in the, not in the hundreds, but in the thousands. I'm here to support the airport at Marsden Point, Country Port. And I say that for a number of reasons. And they're not sort of reasons we might accept as contributing to a better world. But Tiraro was a person who foresaw the changes that were brought about before the Treaty of Waitangi was signed and after. He foresaw that if he didn't do anything, Ngā Puhi would displace him in Whangarei. And he did what he could to protect his own people. He was determined in that. Others would criticise him, others would support him. But if you talk to the people who come from Whangarei, the Ngaitahu people, and others, they would all agree that Tiraro was the one who was in control of Whangarei. I support this airport at Whangarei Point because it will allow the people of Whangarei to be successful in making things happen. Whangarei needs a port. I've been told that. I've read it in the latest news reports that come via the press that things are going to happen, that a port is going to come into being that expands on what there is now. I am told that the trade situation will improve and that all our people will benefit. And I think all the councillors must agree that it is essential that we are able to improve our trading position. But let's be realistic. Being realistic is accepting that the Whangarei that we see now will not be the Whangarei we see in 50 years' time. And so I say to all of us, it is provenance which will allow and give us the opportunity of developing the airport at Whangarei Point. I agree that it should be done. We should be able to score the trifecta: a railway hub, a shipping hub, and an airport hub, concentrated in a small area. And that means less harm to those features of our Whangarei District Council lands that will be affected disproportionately in terms of being valuable farmland, etc. Fantastic habitat for birds and bees and all that sort of thing. That's my submission. If you need to contact me on any issues, I'm available any time all day. Kia ora koutou.
Thank you for your submission. Councillors, questions for clarification? Thank you for your inspiration today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Our next submitter is Paul Vandenberg. Paul's submission is in volume 10, page 76. Welcome, Paul. Oh, thanks,
G'day all.
Over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for having me here. I'm Paul Vandenberg and I live, work and raise a family here in Whangarei. So we've been presented with the possible future tightening of CAA rules and the longer runway that is likely required for future aircrafts and overall future-proof the airport. So I'm not opposed to spending and certainly not opposed to progress. It's very likely that the commercial and economic benefits are significant with a larger airport. However, I do oppose spending that doesn't make sense. The amount of passengers through the Whangarei Airport from 2011 to 2018 indicate a 30% growth. Funnily enough, the NZTA stats show that same growth in road-going vehicles just on State Highway 1 alone around Whangarei. That is 43 times more than airport passengers. If you're considering to spend local money on local improvements, then spend it on accessible transport projects that creates the best local return. The demographic travelling through Whangarei Airport is a very small portion of your Whangarei population. In the economic contribution final report, it is stated that tourism is a large contributing factor. However, I can tell you from a backpacker's point of view and as a world traveller, there is nothing appealing about flying to Whangarei for tourism. You'll find most tourists drive to Whangarei in a van hired from Auckland on their way to the Bay of Islands. So road and rail are the most important connections for provincial towns around the globe. Council could contribute to road and rail improvements as the return on investment for the local population would be far greater than with an airport. If future proving is the main objective, I suggest to invest the proper rail link, negating air travel safety issues. You can fit more passengers per vehicle, and if invested properly, it'll be fully electric. So I'm proposing to keep the airport at the current location in Whangarei. It is just as likely that future aircrafts are lighter, faster, can carry more passengers, and are requiring a shorter runway. Also, residents in the area have purchased or rented a property in the airport area while fully aware of the airport's operations. None of the proposed sites have surrounding residents that purchased property with the knowledge that an airport will be built nearby. Now, more site specific, I live near Ruatangata Site 9 and experience the area daily. The access roads to Site 9 are prone to flooding and normal heavy rainfall, let alone the flooding that occurs in storms like the one we've experienced in recent days. Adding a large impervious surface to the area is likely to make matters worse. The cost of a new airport has been estimated and has been projected onto multiple sites. However, the costs do not include the infrastructure upgrades that are required to service such a new airport. The most pressing issue I would like to raise is that we rely on rainwater. We harvest that from our roofs and put it in our tanks. The air pollution from the aircrafts currently in use will affect us significantly. And our rainwater collection, together with power-free sewage treatment setups, is actually the most sustainable way of water management possible. So other concerns are with the local hapu and their sites of cultural significance, with the fragile ecosystems that live in and around our waterways, and not to mention the dense fog that remains most mornings. But no doubt that the creation of this new airport would be an outstanding achievement on Council's records. However, I encourage you to do the right thing by your Whangarei locals and make choices that will benefit the majority of your residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Councillors, questions for Paul? No questions. Thank you very much for your submission and for your time today.
Thank you.
Just trying to make contact with Wendy, and she will be the last of our submitters to be here before taking a break. So let's hope we can contact her. Can Hannah come back and give us some
asking someone if they're on Is it alright if do a little break?
I'm just going to check on one more submitter who's due. If we get the confirmation that they're either coming or not.
Thank you.
Councillors, Wendy Taylor has made contact and she is cancelling her desire to speak to us. So I will adjourn once again and we will reconvene at 2:25. Thank you. Belay that adjournment, we will take the opportunity to hear from Ross Longfield, and Ross's submission is in volume 1, page 138. Ross, we're looking forward to hearing you speak to your submission for a 5-minute time frame. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, councillors.
Right, very brief. I think, have you got any information that I supplied with? Right.
We have, yes.
Right. Ross Blomfield. About over 40 years experience in architectural design and commercial real estate and development. Specific to airports, I worked at the British Airports Authority in London in the Forward Planning Department. That was for future airport requirements to suit passenger aircraft. I haven't got time today to tell you the interesting story that goes with that, the developments. But, Whangarei Airport, I understand that the land areas, that's Whangarei Airport, 50 hectares more or less, and the current runway is about 1,127 metres long. I understand that basically that's too short for the new aircraft that New Zealand has. Majority of passengers, I understand, also just travel from Whangarei to Auckland back. Probably an average of 6 flights a day. There's probably other options you could consider when you look at airports in Auckland. I'm not sure if it's been listed, but there's a World War II aerodrome just at Whangarei off Gibbs Road. You may be aware of it. But anyway, I'm here today to hopefully explain a little bit further the future air travel. Future air travel. Currently the main aircraft manufacturers, Airbus, Boeing, Rolls-Royce, General Electric Aviation, Lockheed, Versa, to name a few manufacturers. These companies are all developing future aircraft that are environmentally clean, more efficient, and fueled by either electricity or hydrogen. This is our air travel future, and it's happening very rapidly. I hope you've familiarised yourselves with any future websites of aircraft. So, why consider old and outdated technology when developing a new airport? I'd recommend the Council, I would support Council to commission a report into the future aircraft passenger requirements and aircraft that are required to service the future travel needs of Auckland. In other words, see what is required by the use. And British airports, to give you a bit of background, only make their revenue from each touchdown. Touchdown is every time a plane lands on an airport, pays fees. If you don't get enough touchdowns, you run into a loss. Whangarei Airport, I would say, runs at a loss. It's either supported by the ratepayers, and why pay another 200 million, 300 million for a new airport? That's what I'd like to know. That's all I've got to say. If it helps.
Thank you, Ross.
Any questions?
Happy to answer questions. Councillors, any questions for Ross? Thank you for including your research. So, councillors, that does bring us to an end of the submitters wishing to speak in this block. I will now adjourn until 2:25. Thank you.
Do I start?
Yep.
Oh. Mea tuatahi me mihi atu ki tō tau matua nui taranga. Nāna nei te timatatanga me ngā whakautinga o ngā mea katoa. Matu o ia marae, haere ngā mate haere ki te kainga tuturu mō tātou te tangata. Huri ki te kanui ora ko tātou tēnei, kia koutou te kaunihira, mihi atu kia koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko te manu e kai ana I te miro, nōna te ngāhere, ko te manu e kai ana i te mātauranga nōna te ao. Now, that whakatauki there, where this number 9, site 9, there's a block there called middle whakatikitu, and that whakatauki refers to that. So my name is Whangarei Kingi. I make the submission in two parts, one on behalf of myself as an individual and as a trustee of Ngāti Kahu o Torongare, Te Parawhai Api Iwi Trust. I am presently Ngāti Kahu o Torongare mandated representative to Te Hoinga Committee that consists of several hapu representatives of the Whangarei District. The following bullet point cover the cultural issues of each option briefly. Now I'll speak to that. Option 1, which is the Ruatangata West, Site 6. Now the hapu there is Ngāti Manu and Ngāti Hau. There's no one else in that site there. And I thought I'll mention that. Now there's a lot of issues in terms of Site 6. And I think you'll get flack from our people in terms of Site 6. Now if we go to option 2, this is where this whakatauki I'm talking about, Site 9, you have only one tribe, which is Ngāti Kahu, or also known as Ngāti Kahu or Torongare, which is middle whakatiki that I'm talking about, and of course the manu eats the middle. And so once upon a time there must have been heaps of middle there, but you don't have that anymore. Now although we have an awa, a stream that runs through that place called Patu Taniwha. Now there's a bridge there not far from they call it the Ruatangata Garage. Now I was born and bred in Church Road. Our whenua is there, our land is at Ngara Latunua. And so there's, we used to go Ealing, where this bridge is, where this proposal is going down. And I have stated to our people to look at that option. But there are a lot of opposition. But I'm saying it's nothing new for Ngāti Kahu to look at something like this. We were involved in the Deepwater Port, although we objected with Parapau and other hapu. However, in the event that it went ahead, we wanted a kaitiakitanga structure in place, and that happened. So I'm saying here that Site 9 would be the most preferred site. You only got one hapu, and I think we can mitigate some of the issues there, the cultural issues. And as for option 3, One Tree Point, well, I think I read there that if the plane comes in and land, it's too low, you know, so I looked at that, and you'll get a lot of flack from the Hokainga from there too. You know, I mean, they've had developments like the Deepwater Port, Marsden Point, and so, you know, you get flack from the Hokainga, but then again, they could change. That puts Ngāti Kahu, as well as Parapau and Patuharakeke, into that very site of that area of Paupau Whenua. Now, go to Onarahi, that used to be Ngāti Kahu's land, but it was gifted to Tiraro of Te Parapau. However, he sold that gift. So to Ngāti Kahu, you should give that gift back, not to sell that gift. So we would put ourselves in there should that continue. But I don't think so. It would be, you know, I don't think that using Onarahi, if you're going to have bigger planes, you know, you've got to have quite a big area to land. So, and then you get the moaning people from Onarahi. Some of my whānau too live there. And they moan about the helicopters going there. But I think that, yeah, there are cultural issues, but I believe you can mitigate those cultural issues. And I think if we go through it, but like I said, my people from Ngāti Kahu, there was an influence by other hapu on my people. But I believe if we do sit down with Ngāti Kahu, also known as Ngāti Kahu or Torongare, I think they'll realise the bigger picture. And because you've got the other highway coming from Dagaville, and you know, it'll take the people north, and it's growing. You can't stop progress. You know, that's why I tell my people, you can't stop progress. Now, when the Deepwater Port happened, you know, everything kind of, because we had this kaitiakitanga structure, and I'm sure we can do the same thing. If they're worried about the Wairua River, there's only two hapus, Ngāti Kahu and Parawhau, in terms of the Wairua, and also maybe Ngāti Manu and Ngāti Hau. So I'll leave it at that. So I'm in support of number 9.
Sure. Councillors, questions? Councillor Murphy.
Kia ora, Whangarei. When you first started talking, and you had your whakataiki, and then you talked about the block, a block of bush where there used to be...
Because I've got
sorry, I know, I talked too quietly. When you first started talking, you talked about a block in Site 9, where there used to be meadow, you said the name of it, but I didn't catch it.
I really can't hear you. I really can't hear you, because I've got a disability, ACC. I've got to have a special thing, because I'm really deaf in one ear.
I'll email you if you want. I was just wondering...
I asked the lady if you could have a speaker I can hear. And
it was just the name of that block in Site 9.
What was the name of the block in Site 9, Whangarei?
Well, because it said Rua Tangata, number 9, and I thought, well, that don't look right, because it's near the Wairua River, it has to be Middle Whakatiki.
Say that again?
Middle Whakatiki, but you can check, I went to the Waitangi Tribunal hearings, and the Waitangi Tribunal, like Crown Forest Rental Trust, commissioned mapping exercise, and that was done by Tony Walsh's wife. I forget her name, but it's public information. You can get that online, you know, so it's a block, and it tells you who the tribe is of that particular block, even for Rua Tangata. It has the maps of all those blocks. So I thought I'd mention it, but 6 is definitely Ngāti Hau and Ngāti Manu. I won't dispute that, because they're right next door to us, you know. I thought I'd mention it.
Yep.
Yes, Carol.
Kia ora, and thank you very much for your presentation. I was interested to hear that Ngāti Kahu or Torongare had an interest in Whangarei.
Yes.
And so my question of you is, if we kept the airport at Whangarei, do you think that Ngāti Kahu or Torongare should be part of the committee that oversees?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. Like I said, it's online information. They were, what's her name? She's a Bergen, but it's Tony Wassell's wife. She was commissioned to do block by block by block. So all that stuff is in there. So, you know, all the information is online, it's public. It went through the Waitangi Tribunal. So I tell anyone, just go online, the information's there, you know, and so you can access those reports. That's public information.
Any other questions?
Oh, is that it? Oh, thank you very much. Ngā mihi kia koutou.
Ka kite.
Thank you. Thank you.
What? Are you going to be the mayor?
More than likely.
I said to Carol.
He thinks so.
Carol's or even Gavin.
What now?
Okay, councillors, We are still being live streamed. Now, councillors, we have had no response from the final submitter, and I can assurances we've sought high and low, and they do not appear to be here. So I think that brings us to an end of our hearings today. We open the karakia. I'm going to ask Councillor Collett to also close our meeting with karakia. Thank you.
Tahia te ara e tako tōne, tue e runga, tue e aro, tue e ako rana. Ronga mau, maori tu, maori wo, maori pa, ti hei, maori. Sweep clear the path before us, unite above, unite below, unite to combine the hearts of all, to a commitment to community, stand the life force, alert to the life force, to balance the life force, seize the breath.
Councillors, thank you all for your time today. And just a reminder that tomorrow there is a full day of workshop, etc., introduction updates, and so